Church, if you would, as we start this morning, would you stand up where you're at and say hello to the people that are around you and encourage them in some way? Wave at them. Gloria's got it figured out. She's just going to cover everybody at once. Thank you once again for being with us. We are continuing our series in the book of Romans, chapter 12, in a series that we're calling A Life of Significance. And if you follow along in your bulletin each week, each one of these have had a subtitle that ends with an ED at the end. And this morning I've titled today's lesson, Filled, that we would be filled with a life that is meaningful, that we would be filled with, as we're going to talk about, love for one another. This is a section of Scripture that many people have kind of pointed out is kind of very similar to what we would know as the Sermon on the Mount in Romans 5 through 7. As a matter of fact, Romans 12 is kind of like a really short, condensed version. So like if you were just hunting the condensed version of the Sermon on the Mount, which is when Jesus goes and gives his code of ethics, how Christians will live in a world that stands in contrast to them so that they can make an impact on the world. And I believe that I like to talk a lot about the concept of introspection because I think we as Westerners struggle with it so much. And I would say that just to kind of start us off and start thinking about it this morning is that both the Sermon on the Mount and Romans 12, these are the kind of the tools that God gives us to help us with introspection. Am I living a life of holiness to God? Well, inevitably we are all struggling in some area, aren't we? Well, where would we find out what the holes in our life are so that we can better serve God? Well, I believe that we would start in passages like this and passages like Matthew 5 through 7 where Scriptures give us a picture, an image of what a life that is cruciform, that is crucified with Christ and taking the form of being crucified with Christ. What does that look like day to day? What does it look like to live life as a Christian each and every day? I'm convinced now more than ever that it is easier today than ever. Well, I hate hyperbole. It's easier now than it has been any other point in my life to stand as a contrast to the world. Because it seems like the bar has just been lowered and lowered and lowered. If you want to stand out as a Christian, just love people. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit as we get started this morning, is that it's not rocket science to love people, but it's definitely a contrast to what's going on in so many elements of our world and the way it consumes us. So let's start in Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 9, with this first line here, by the way. It says, love must be sincere. In the original the original Greek, this phrase doesn't actually have a verb in it. So it may could be read just as love sincere. And I say that and point that out because I believe that some commentators even believe that this means that this is kind of a heading. Okay, so they're saying love sincere, okay, and then he's going to give you what it means to be sincere in your love for each other. And he says, listen, in order to love sincerely, in order to love in a way that is authentic and genuine, you have to hate the opposite of love. You have to hate what is evil. This is where, church, we stand at a crossroads in so many ways as we move into what many would call a post-Christian era in the United States of America, as our society becomes increasingly secular. And I'm one that's kind of against all this alarmist behavior that sometimes we get into, but there's no doubt that less and less people statistically are pointing to Jesus as the foundation of their life. And the reality is that if we are going to stand as Christians, we have to universally hate the things in this world that are evil. And that is tough because the lines of what is evil and what is good are constantly being blurred, and it takes a constant discernment. It takes that constant, as we go back to the beginning of this chapter. Remember, we're reading through this chapter slow, but it's all one context. That when we talk about the daily renewal of the mind, we've got to be renewing our mind all the time to determine what is good and what is evil, because more than ever, our world is just trying to blur the lines. They're trying to convince us and tell us that maybe there really is no evil, and maybe there really is no good. And the reality is that we as Christians have to be constantly vigilant. We've got to be vigilant about this constant introspection of asking, what are the things in my life that I'm allowing to remain and harbor up in my heart that are truly evil? And I believe with all my heart that 50 years from now, somebody will look back onto the church of today and we will have had some glaring blind spot, and that we will have not caught something. We've seen that, right? We look back 50 and 70 years ago and we see people who we believe with all their hearts were trying to love Jesus, and they just had some things really mixed up. It's my belief that if you brought many people from the 50s and 60s in the United States into today, they would be able to get rid of many of the racial attitudes and things they had in their heart. I believe that we've come somewhere on that, and we're able to look back and say that was a blind spot, and it was a glaring blind spot in our churches because of the way our churches behaved during that time. I have no doubt. And there were people ringing the alarm bells back then. If you want to go back and read, there's people saying, listen, this is not right. You're not acting like Jesus. There's something in the church right now that is that thing. I don't know what it is. If I knew what it is, I would tell you right now. But I'm just simply saying that if we're going to really hate what is evil, we've got to be constantly checking our heart and asking, am I really hating that thing which is evil? And am I doing this next thing that Paul points out? Am I clinging to what is good? Am I not just trying to muddle along and just blur the lines and be close to the line, but am I living a life that is truly a life of contrast, where when people see me, they look at me and they may not even agree with what I believe. Scripture talks a lot about that, doesn't it? It talks about the fact that you need to live a life so that unbelievers, even if they don't like what you have to say, at the end of the day, they're not going to have something bad to throw against you. They're not going to have anything to throw at you that sticks. And that's why even Jesus, they didn't like what he had to say. And ultimately, he went to a cross, first and foremost, because he claimed to be God, who he was. But at the end of the day, they had to make up a lot of things about Jesus in order to get him to that cross, didn't they? They didn't like what he had to say, but they had to lie about him in order to make him look bad. And I would just say to us as Christians today, if we're going to really start out with this concept of a sincere love, we've got to be living the kinds of life that if somebody wants to accuse you of something, they're going to have to make up lies about you. Now, church, that sounds good, but I recognize and realize that is tough. It is tough, isn't it? It's tough to constantly be on guard and to be watching those things. And that's where this concept of a daily renewal, and we're going to talk about this as we get in the lesson this morning, this concept of an inner holiness, that we're seeking to be the same person publicly as we are privately. That if we're seeking to be that person, it's a constant daily renewal that we have to go through in our heart. And one of the things that we use to do that is not just how we look at ourselves, but we become devoted to one another in love. The best thing you can have in your life is somebody who truly loves you and is not afraid to tell you when you've stepped out of bounds. And we need to be devoted to one another in love, with a sincere heart, with unselfish hearts, with hearts that are geared towards becoming more and more like Jesus. And when we do that, we will inevitably honor one another above ourselves. We've talked about this concept. It's going to come up several times in this passage because this whole passage is ultimately about being humble. It's about putting other people in front of yourself. And that's a tough thing to do in a world that teaches you to look out for you. And we're constantly asking, how do we live this life of humility, of quietness? The reality is, if we're ever going to live lives that have real significance, they've got to be rooted in love. They've got to be rooted. And you might say, that is the single, I learned that. That's one of the first things we learn in Bible school, isn't it? That we love God and we love others. And that we love Jesus because Jesus first loved us. And we sing the songs, right? Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. And in some ways, there should be a time, maybe if we think about this just from a logic perspective, that we can graduate away from that and just talk about other things. But let me just encourage you, church, that there's never a time where we're going to stop needing teaching about loving each other. Because the devil is hard at work trying to get you to look out for yourself and to give you that ego and that pride that so frequently needs to die in all of us. This constant breaking of the heart. I love that song. Break my heart, dear Lord. And it says, tear the barriers down. Tear the things down that are stopping me from loving the person that's sitting across the aisle from me right now, or the person that's sitting across the street from me, the person who is in my workplace who's not treating me very kindly. Do what you need to do, God, to break my heart and tear those barriers down. Church, we will never ever have too much preaching about love and too much teaching about love. Because if there's one thing the Scripture is clear on, is that if you don't get love right, none of the other stuff matters. As Paul just said, let's go back. Love, sincere. Love has to be sincere. It has to come from a heart that is both hating evil and clinging to what is good. It's devoted to others. It's honoring other people above ourselves. Then he says in Romans 12, verse 11, never be lacking in zeal. You know, that's a tough thing, to always be on your A game. Always be excited about loving God and loving others. I mean, let's just be honest with each other. Sometimes loving God and loving others, sometimes to our little hearts, feels more like a chore than it does a privilege. And we need to be constantly trying to flip that script, okay? That we need to be start looking at loving others and loving God more of a privilege than it is a chore. But that's tough. And when Paul tells us never be lacking in zeal, remember he's just said that because he said that right to a group of people. He said, you got to be looking out for each other. You got to be building each other up. The reality is that we're going to struggle to ever reach this ideal. It's an ideal. It's something that we're never going to accomplish in perfectness, but it's something we strive towards. Unless we're constantly building each other up and we're exciting each other about Jesus and about love. We sit on Saturdays and we understand totally what zeal is, don't we? Some of you maybe not, I don't know, but many of you know what I mean when I say that. That you, in a college football obsessed world that we live in where we live, and some other places it says some other sport, some places it's soccer, and some places it's NFL, whatever it may be, but you don't struggle to understand what zeal is on a Saturday when your team scores a touchdown. Can we try to move those same principles into our religious life? Do we feel the same way when somebody devotes themselves to God and makes a decision to put on Jesus? Do we feel the same way? Or actually we should feel much better than when our team scores a winning touchdown? Or when our team drives in a ninth inning hit to win the first game of the NLCS late last night. You know, like, do we have those same emotions when we see the success of our brothers and sisters? Those are things that we have to be training our heart to do. This constant, he says, keep your spiritual fervor. Be constantly reminding yourself of the day that you became a Christian. The day that you became a Christian, I'm convinced that on that day, most people have a fervor, they have a desire, they have a burning in their heart to serve God with all their heart, soul, and mind. Bring us back, Lord, to that. And He tells us how to do it too, doesn't He? He says you do it by serving God, by living it. Okay? This is why it's impossible to really, really, really be Christian without Christian community. And I'm not saying that you can be in Christian community and not get it still, but I still think that the concept that sometimes is floated around in our world, that I'm religious, but I don't take place in, I'm not part of a religious community. Listen, when I tell you this is so true. Religious communities are broken, and they have issues, and they have struggles, and they have troubles, and they are filled with people that are sinners just like you. We're not asking you to come into a place where we're asking you to come into a place because we're all fighting a battle, and you can't fight this battle by yourself. And you've got to be having this serving of the Lord. And he breaks into this in Romans chapter 12, verse 12, the next verse, and this little, he's got three little statements he's going to say. He says, you need to be filled with joy in your hope. I just finished a series a few weeks ago. I know it bothered some of you because it really challenged a lot of your thinking, and I get that. And I get that some of you grasped onto something. I heard some comments. Some of you grasped onto something that you'd been struggling to grasp on your whole life, and I praise God for that. But the point of that whole series was that we keep hope in front of us, that we keep mindful of the fact that there's something better on the horizon than what we're experiencing now, and we need to be full of joy in that hope. We need to keep hope in front of us, because hope is that driving force. To us that are Christians, I think of joy, and I think joy is that carrot that is dangled that just keeps you moving forward. We love to think that we're so much better and smarter than the animals, but I always think of dog racing, right? You go to a dog race and they've got a piece of meat or something out in front of the dogs, and it runs around the track, and those dogs are the difference though is they're running after something that they're probably not going to get, right? But we are keeping something in front of us that one day we're going to obtain. And sometimes along the race that is life, that feels long and feels like a struggle and feels hurtful and painful, and we deal with all kinds of emotions, it's sometimes easy for us to think and get to the mind thinking of, am I really going to ever be able to grab that thing that is in front of us? And to that, I just say, hold on, church. We hold on to the hope that's out in front of us. When Jesus makes all things new, when He fixes all the problems and the ailments, the world that is to come, whatever you believe that to be, whatever it's going, I can promise you this thing, it's going to be beautiful. And it's going to be what God intended for us to enjoy and live in. And all of the pain and the sorrow of this world is going to do away. And so because of that, we don't, even though we grieve, if we didn't grieve as Christians, people would look at us and they would think we were really weird. But we also recognize that when we grieve, we don't have to grieve like everybody else grieves, because there's a spiritual fervor and there's a zeal and there's a joy, because there's a hope out in front of us and we're just striving towards it. And we can go to funerals and they're sad, but they're not sad in the way that those who have no hope are sad. And so this constant zeal, some of this is literally, he's talking about being excited, being happy, speaking up, and letting your faith be known. There's an element of that, but it's also about an inner part of you that's just constantly excited about the future. It's so easy to become depressed when what we have in our world and surrounding us is a whole bunch of noise, and it makes us become doom and gloom people. I was reading this week about a missionary who was from the East, and he came to the West for the first time, and he wrote about his experiences about coming to the West for the first time. And he grew up in abject poverty where he came from. And it wasn't poverty as some people here know poverty. It was true blue poverty. As a matter of fact, he was talking about some of his missionary friends he knew of that were living a similar lifestyle. Sometimes they would have kids they would have to close their windows at night so that people couldn't hear their hungry kids crying, because they didn't want people, because they were the missionary in town and they were go into new regions, and they didn't want to be a burden on those people while they were trying to teach them the gospel. And I can't wrap my mind around that. And he talked about the things that just shocked him when he came here. And he said everybody wanted to show us, when I came here, they wanted to show me their big church buildings, their big pretty church buildings. He said that didn't really impress me much, because in the East we don't have much, but we do have big pretty church buildings. We have big religious places. He said the things that shocked me is that you had running water 24/7, 365 that you could have. You had food in excess. He said one of the things that just really struck me in a negative way was that Western Christians and Western people had lost the sense of knowing how to be quiet. And so while we understand that it's got to be rooted in zeal, this next little piece here is, I think those slides did I miss a slide? No, here it is. No, here we go. Be joyful in hope, but you have to also be patient in affliction. You have to be faithful in prayer. You got to have an inner life. And he talked about the fact that he found that people, it's so weird because we don't know anything different than this. My dogs, I turn the radio on for them to go to bed at night. It's to drown out other noises. But he said that people were driving around in cars, and they were driving around and they had the radio on, and nobody was even listening to it. He said the Western world totally forgot what it's like to be quiet and to hear silence. You know what happens when we can't handle silence and we just fill it with more busyness? And I say this from somebody whose life's been pretty busy lately. We struggle to go through this concept of introspection. We just fill our lives with more noise. And this is not unique to people who are in the working world. How many people out here in the retired world have I heard, some of you, very ones in this room, have heard you say, I retired and now I'm busier than I've ever been. We struggle to stop. He says you got to be patient in affliction, you got to be faithful in prayer, you've got to have an inner holy life that matches this zeal that you're showing publicly. You've got to learn to be quiet with God. You've got to learn to make there be a substance. How do you have love sincere? Where we started with this, you can't have love sincere by merely doing the outward things where people see you and pat you on the back. But you've got to be patient when things are not going your way. And you've got to be faithful in having an inner holy life with God. You can't truly inspect what needs changed in your life until you learn how to be quiet with God. It's awkward, isn't it? different, isn't it? You see, we go through worship services, and one of the things we do in those worship services is we understand, and there's all kinds of psychosocial experiments. We understand people's attention spans are like 7 seconds, and so this is like, it's getting less and less all the time. You no longer, advertisers used to think they can make a 30-second commercial, and now they recognize they got to make their point in like 7 seconds in order to get people's attention. King of ADHD right here, okay? I get it. I struggle with learning how to be quiet, to be calm, to allow God to speak into my life and allow me to speak to Him. If anything, Western Christians struggle with, I believe it's an inner holiness and inner peace that many people in the East who are not in the rat race, not in the constant busyness and the constant spin cycle that is life as we know it, they have the opportunity to focus their hearts on God. They don't have a TV to distract them 24/7. They don't have a device in their pocket that accesses any bit of information they could ever dream about investing in this world. They don't have the opportunities that we take for granted. I can literally, right now on this stage, I could, and maybe without you even knowing it, I could order some food for lunch and it would be at my house waiting on me when I got there. I haven't done that. I thought about doing it just to see if I did it, to tell you that I did it. We struggle to be quiet. If you're going to live a life that is of significance, it's got to be rooted in holiness. It's got to be rooted in that quiet life where we're patient when things are in affliction, when things are not going our way, and that we're constant in our prayer life, in our living our life, our vertical life with Jesus is in place. It's so easy. And I don't say this to bark at you. I say this because I need to hear it. It's so easy for that prayer life to go by the wayside. And we lose personal, private communication with God. It's so easy that I can stand up here and preach to you every week, and I recognize when I'm saying these things that mine's not where it needs to be. May we be living lives of significance, and in that significance, may we be zealous publicly. May we come here and praise God together. Amen? But may we go into our closet and develop a meaningful, rooted relationship with God. If we come here and praise God together, but it's not got roots to it, you know what happens, don't you? The Bible talks about what happens when you're not rooted. When the storms come and the waves come and the wind comes, topple over. I recognize nothing I've said today is earth-shattering. Okay, I didn't introduce you to any new ideal. There's nothing new about love, and there's nothing new about zeal, and there's nothing new about holiness. You've heard everything I've said today in some form or another through the years. And I recognize that what Paul is trying to teach us here, and it's interesting because Jesus used to repeat these things over and over. As a matter of fact, we reference the Sermon on the Mount, and many people believe the Sermon on the Mount is actually a collection of his teachings because he went everywhere teaching them. Everywhere he went, he would teach those things. And he never stopped and said, well, we finished talking about love enough. We finished talking about zeal enough. We finished talking about holiness enough. He would constantly repeat, and he would try to instill those things in his apostles because he knew there was a time where testing was going to come, affliction was going to come, and if they didn't have roots in these things, they were going to topple over. Guess what happened? Some of his apostles struggled, didn't they? At least initially, when the affliction came. And I'd just like to remind you this. This is a quote. It doesn't have an author. If it had the author, I'd tell it to you, but it didn't come from me. But there are no secrets of success. Success is doing the things you know you should do, and success is not doing the things you know you should not do. This is not rocket science. but we need to hear it. That if you want to be successful and live a life of significance, it's not about finding a magic pill, potion, or secret, or a book that you can finally read. And if you read that book, all your problems in your life are going to go away. It's not a self-help section. Success is merely, and by the way, this is biblical, isn't it? We just read it. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. You want to be successful in life? Make it your effort in life to live a life that is driven and rooted and pushed by the Holy Spirit, where you hate what is evil and you love what is good. It's that simple. It's simple in words. It's tough to do, but it's what we as Christians are on mission to do. And as I said earlier, the bar is so low that in order to stand and contrast this world, simple acts of love, once again, can make such a profound impact on our world. May we love those that are different. May we love those who are hurting. May we love those who are struggling. May it be the root of our lives, that those things be markers of our life. May they be markers not of our own lives, but the lives of this church as we go forward. Let's have a word of prayer together. Thank you, God, for loving us. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for giving us the day and this time together. We want to be loving. We want to be zealous. But we also want to be rooted in holiness and in a relationship with you. May we strive this week to become a little more holy. May that make us a little more zealous. And may we love those who most desperately need the love of Jesus in their life. God, we thank you for the ways that you've shown yourself to us. We pray that you'll continue to show yourself to us in the days that are ahead. And that you will show out in our lives in a way that it doesn't bring honor to us, but it brings honor to you through us. Use us as instruments and as vessels of your peace. And may we live a life that is a life of significance, not by the world's standards or measurements, but by your holy standards. In Jesus we pray, and the church together can say, Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for being here with us and being part of this. And we want you to know that we are a church family that's a bunch of people who are struggling through this world together. And there's no better feeling than knowing that you've got people around you who are dealing with a lot of the same problems that you're dealing with. Maybe you're struggling with something and you need some kind of public help. We'd love to help with that. We always offer a song at the end of a sermon. We used to call this the invitation song, and we used to do what we, for years. I've talked about this before, but I used to, when I was a kid, you only came forward if you had missed too much church, if you had done something really bad, and we would call it the walk of shame, and I'd sit in the audience as a 13-year-old, and I'd say, wonder what they did wrong. That's not what we want this to be. We want this to be a time in which you let us know you're spiritually doing great, or you're spiritually struggling and you need love of people that surround you. That's what we want this to be. Not a walk of shame, but an embrace that we can give to you. But it's not the only way. Just don't leave here without letting somebody know that you're struggling. And let's see what we can do to help you spiritually. If you've got any spiritual needs, let it be known while we'll stand and sing together.